Welcome to all of you in this afternoon tea seminar on impact licensing and impact. I hope you have your tea ready, as I have, because it's tea with ASTP. Let me introduce the topic to all of you. There is an increasing pressure on technical offices, staff especially, to demonstrate that their activities have an impact. Impact is a vital word this afternoon. Impact that goes beyond pure financial return from commercial technology licensing deals. And indeed, we're seeing more emphasis on transferring non traditional assets, realizing value from the art, humanities, social sciences, and on supporting collaboration and transfer that leads to societal benefit, another vital key term this afternoon. Both policymakers and TT professionals are being urged, invited, not just invited, but really urged to seek wider useful results, including through more responsible and equitable access that target wider geographical markets. These approaches typically require new underlying business models, and that is challenging. New business models, new tools, new skills. And in order to assist TTO staff herewith, we have invited two key players at a moment. And both of those players are EU, they lead EU funded Horizon Europe initiatives. So, on the one hand, there is Bruno van der Meulen for Impact Licensing Initiative and Impact IP headed by Lisa Cowie. And they are both in their own unique ways developing tools and training courses that address this need for stronger, more responsible, more societally relevant, and more global impact of IP, and the removal of associated barriers to securing licensing deals. So I invite you to join us to find out more about both organizations, their leaders, their founders, and look at the similarities, but because there are quite some similarities between both organizations and also some dissimilarities, and it's to unveil the possible confusion which has arisen amongst members of ASTP that we have specially organized this afternoon seminar. So I'm happy to invite Bruno van der Meulen to give a short introduction of, for the time being, just himself. You have 1 minute, Bruno.
Thank you. Thank you, Geert. Good afternoon, everyone. Very happy to be there here. I had the honor of being in Vilnius also at the annual event last week, but I'm happy to meet you here all online. I am a Belgian trained IP lawyer, and I am a director of the Impact Licensing Initiative, which is a Belgian nonprofit organization that assists companies and IP owners and institutions to find new and additional opportunities to use their IP, to repurpose their IP in order to license it out to meet societal needs. In my previous life, I was a patent litigator, and since 5 years, I stepped out of that business from a big law firm, and I'm now experienced a totally new life and totally new way to deal with intellectual property. That is the societal use and application of intellectual property in which I believe very, very strongly, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bruno. So I now turn to Lisa Cowie. So this is your 1 minute of introduction. Go ahead.
Thank you. Hello. It's very nice to be here. It's good to be online. Tell you a bit about the Impact IP project and to learn more about ILI. I was also in Vilnius last week and it was fascinating to hear more about that. So it was good to be able to join today. By background, many years ago, I was a physicist who then moved out to industry. Since about 2007, I've worked on big national capacity building programs for technology transfer. A lot of them in our newer EU member states and in countries that are interested in trying to join the EU. So I've been somebody who's helped to set up a lot of technology transfer offices, a lot of capacity building, a lot of instrument development, a lot of working with national government funding agencies. And a lot of project implementation. Impact IP is probably my second really big Horizon Europe project. It's very enjoyable. We have 6 partners involved, and I'm looking forward to telling you a bit more about the project itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, and also Bruno. So the agenda for this afternoon, we will have some 30 minutes for an intimate conversation with the both speakers, with Bruno and Lisa. In the meantime, you'll have the possibility to drop your questions in the Q&A, because after this conversation, we will move to your questions, your difficulties in seeing and understanding the similarities, sharing your enthusiasm for both of them. So we'll head off with the conversation. And I'm in charge for kind of the questions and challenging both speakers. And a first question that came to mind when looking at both initiatives, and I myself know Impact Licensing Initiative a bit better, and I would say quite well, because Bruno and I have been in touch for the last 20, 30, maybe 40 years, and I've seen the shift in Bruno's interest and career. So I would like to hear from both speakers. What do you consider? What do you consider the key objectives of your organization? And I will turn to Lisa first, and then to Bruno.
Well, for our project, because we are only a project, we're 18 months into 36 months on this, but for our project, the main objective is to remove barriers to licensing.
Mm-hmm.
So no matter what sort of technology or intellectual asset you are developing or you have in-house if you're an enterprise, we're very much about exploring what would stop that reaching another user through a licensing deal. And that can be things that would happen right at the point where you're trying to negotiate. So, for example, if you were trying to negotiate with a very large company to get them to bring a pharmaceutical to the market, not just for those who would pay a very high price for it, but for countries that cannot afford to pay, you might be saying, well, how do we change the clauses? What's different about a licensing deal which is to do with equitable access? But it could also be happening right at the very beginning of the process. So part of what
Mm-hmm.
we do in Impact IP is to look at co-creation as well as a very dynamic environment where people need to be able to trust each other. People need to be able to share ideas very freely at the beginning, because if that doesn't happen, then at the end, there is no licensing deal to bring it out. And we also look at sometimes what can happen in the middle. So we look at 3 scenarios, and in our scenario on what we call classical plus, or we could talk more about the 3 scenarios
Mm-hmm.
later,
Yeah.
we might well be saying it's very difficult to get this intellectual property or asset licensed because it isn't actually worth very much individually. It's a social sciences questionnaire, but actually, for a lot of people out there, it would be really useful to have it. So it would have impact for individual people.
Let's go to
Mm.
the approaches in a minute. Let's first turn to Bruno. Bruno, key objectives of ILI.
Our key objective, Geertra, is to maximize the societal impact of research, innovation, and IP development in general. And by maximizing, we mean that we do not necessarily search only for new IP that can create impact, but we are looking at existing IP portfolios of institutions, of companies, and we try to think with them out of the box how their very commercial or very profitable, very well-known technology that is working well in traditional markets could have also a societal use. And we call that a repurposing of technology, which in itself is a creation of IP. And we try to encourage IP owners to look into that and to grant licenses only for that societal purposes to either spin-off companies or social ventures, or as we call it, clearinghouses. That is our main objective.
Is it fair to say that in your case, Lisa, of course it's about technology, but it may be technology which is not existing yet, or in an infant stadium to well-developed technologies, whereas with you, Bruno, you mainly focus on products which have already been no certain technologies which already have been established or developed and then maybe repurposed. Would that be fair to say?
Largely for us, yes, apart from our enterprise part, but that's I'd put that on one side. We're mainly there for today's audience, for technology transfer officers, for people who've carried out research projects and are now trying to get the results of those research
Mhm.
projects out for impact.
Whereas in your case, Bruno, the products have already been created,
They
and you
are
go from there.
created or they're ready to be created. We have one example in our portfolio
We'll get
of,
there. We'll get to that
yeah,
example.
it can be both, but the most desirable scenario is where the technology is already proven and mature. Yes.
Okay. So then I come back to Lisa, because you were pointing to the key approaches within your organization. And I think you mentioned there are 3 of them. Could you point
Yeah,
to them?
within the project, I keep coming back to the fact we aren't an organisation because we're 6 organisations delivering the project, and whereas Bruno is an organisation. Within the project, we have looked at 3 main scenarios, and we then have put a toolkit together to help people license under those 3 scenarios. Now, I can talk about the scenarios if you want me to, or I can wait.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead
Okay.
briefly. Yes.
So we have what we call classical plus, and this would be for assets research results that are not classical. Classical is mainly patenting. We feel patenting is
Mhm.
being done fine. We're not looking at patenting, but where we have new digital um, results coming through, an awful lot from the human sciences, the arts, and the social sciences, where these don't necessarily have very high financial value and you can't often patent them. But we would look at that under our classical plus scenario to say, how can we help you to shift these to the outside world for impact? We have co-creation as a
Mhm.
scenario where again, we're creating together lots of different stakeholders, possibly lots of different organizations, different motivators coming out to try ultimately to get their solution to market. And then we have our third scenario, which is crisis.
Mhm.
And crisis can partly look at the sort of thing that we had in 2020 when
Mhm.
we really knew about crisis. But in fact, our toolkit focuses more on how we can prevent crises because there's an awful lot of crisis going on in the world that wouldn't exist if more people had equitable access to technology.
I turn to Bruno. Bruno, what do you consider the key approaches with ILI?
Our key approaches are, and now when we mention ILI, we mean the European initiative that we are sponsored by, we are
Mhm.
helped by, funded by, is to bring it at a, I would say, standard level of higher level. Our concern is that impact licensing becomes a generic term, that there is a lot of greenwashing in a few years. So we are setting up standards. And the first thing to do is that we are trying to promote our 3 main principles, the principle of intentionality, that there must be an intention to create societal value and not merely show the potential of a technology to create societal value. There is a lot of activity going on indexing IP on their SDG potential, but that's not what we intend to see. We want to have a real intention to use the technology. The second principle is the principle of additionality. We do not want to convince IP owners to dedicate their IP to societal purposes, as if they should throw everything into not the public domain, but as if all their IP should have a societal purpose. No, we do not want to discourage them to use the IP for a normal profitable exploitation, but we try to help them to find an additional way of exploiting, an additional way with less financial return,
Mhm.
but with huge impact on return. And then thirdly, our third tool is the measurability. We help the IP owners to measure the impact so that they can report back to their stakeholders and their shareholders. That is a very important aspect. And how do we do that? We make tools. We are trying to make an impact licensing builder by which we combine the traditional high-value industrial licenses that I know well from my past life, and we combine those with clauses that ensure that also the impact, the societal impact of that technology can be used. So the 3 principles that I explained are built into the legal text, the licensing agreements, and we have then 3 levels. We have a basic impact licensing agreement that meets what we would call a silver standard. We have another one that has a gold standard, and we even have them with a platinum standard, if I can say. So
Okay.
it's all a matter of gradation of the impact licensing
Yeah,
clauses.
I would like to turn to Lisa, because Lisa, I remember that in the three scenarios, uh, co-creation and crisis, that
Classical
you,
plus, but yes,
yeah,
yep,
classical
yep.
plus. The plus is always important. Never
Plus is
forget the
really
plus.
important. Yep.
Classical plus, co-creation and crisis. You shared with me at a previous conversation that for each of the three scenarios, you have specific tools. Could you explain a bit more about those tools?
Absolutely. I mean, our project does have similarities with the one that Bruno leads in that we're both developing a toolkit and a training course. For us, you could imagine our toolbox being broken into three sections. So we will have tools for Classical Plus, tools for
Hmm.
co-creation, and tools for crisis. And they will be clustered and specific. And some people might say we'd like to access all three sections if you're working in a tech transfer office. But I think some people will come in and say, actually, well, this is the cluster of tools that fit with what we do at our organization or the area I'm responsible for as a tech transfer professional. And they will come in and use that cluster of tools.
So I hope for the audience you're seeing the kind of outlines in both organizations. And now I'm going to push you a little bit more and invite you to point to the differences between the two projects or organizations, so you wish. And I first turn to Bruno. Do you
Um,
see any? You may start with the similarities, but I think that's pretty clear by now. But the differences between the two projects slash organizations.
in our project, and we stressed that very much in Vilnius last week, and this is particularly important for the membership of ASTP, we are looking for to establish clearinghouses. And clearinghouses are organizations, they can be TTOs, they can be
Hmm.
non-profit ventures, they can be any organization that stands in the middle between an IP owner and a licensee who has a societal need. And those clearinghouses, we try to set them up with a certain certification system, with the guidance and principles they should comply with. And I think that is something very specific for our ILI project.
Hmm. And you, Lisa, how would you respond to this question?
Well, I was actually, for me, the projects are hugely different, which is why I have been slightly perplexed by the number of people who confuse them on the grounds they're both called Impact and they're both
Uh-huh.
producing tools for licensing. They're really very, very different. So we are taking this scenario-based approach. And while some of the technology that will be released through our toolkit may go for societal benefit, that isn't a focus for us.
Hmm.
I think a lot of it will, because the technology that is being held back often doesn't have strong economic value, and you need to find a different business model to unleash it on society. But we start very much from this, in the end, a user toolkit. We will not, in the end, be setting up clearinghouses and continuing to work. We will be handing our toolkit over to licensing professionals, people who work within the lessee organization, for example, people who are associated with ASTP because they're tech transfer professionals. The toolkit at that point is theirs to take away and use as they wish with their projects. And the projects can be widely different. Just at the moment, they're being held back from reaching the market.
I'm going to challenge you anyway to, now you've pointed to the big differences, to point to the complementarities. And I'll start with Lisa.
In terms of complementarities as opposed to similarities, if we look at complementarities, um, I think that probably by helping more technology come to market, at one level, you could say we will feed the pipeline for initiatives like ILI because they will look at the technology that is now emerging and saying,
Hmm.
well, actually, we could repurpose that for another region as well. So I think that's possibly the way that we will be feeding in. And I also hope by widening people's understanding of how they can bring technology to market in the same way, they will have a little bit more of a think about not just economic value, but moving towards responsible licensing and equitable access, which in the end, I hope too would lead them downstream towards initiatives like ILI. That's my hope.
That sounds very, very promising. Uh,
Well, it
Bruno.
has to. I mean, you know,
I,
we got funded.
I can only agree with Lisa. Indeed, the more successful her project on impact is, the more successful or the more potential there is for our pipeline
Uh-huh.
to be filled. So I'm not saying that in timeline there is, well, maybe it is. Maybe in the timeline, the project of Lisa and toolkit of Lisa can be applied, and the more that is successful, the more our pipeline and our toolkit can become successful as well. So there is certainly a lot of complementarity, and I would stress those rather than the differences.
Okay, so I'm taking you still a little bit further, and I would like to invite you to think not in terms of similarities, dissimilarities, or complementarities. I would like to kind of rephrase the issue by asking you, which key element would you like to highlight and bring to market when bring to market when you bring the product to market?
Well,
That's hard, right?
perhaps I can answer that one. I mean, we have three kits underneath our overall
Yes.
toolbox. If you came to me personally and said, which one do I really want to see to take off? It's probably the hardest one because it's related to the crisis equitable access, where I really would like to see more universities try and do licensing deals where, yes, they manage to do the one that brings in a lot of money, but they also manage to persuade more of their licensees that they should be putting the effort into bringing technology to other markets. And I sit in Oxford. This is where I'm based when I'm not out in the Western Balkans. And one of the deals for Oxford, the city, that we're so proud of was the Oxford AstraZeneca deal
Mm-hmm.
for the vaccine against COVID, where AstraZeneca said, we won't just produce this for the West, we will produce this for everybody at cost. And I would, from our toolkit, what I would really love would be more universities. They all say to me, it's a really nice idea, be really difficult. I would like more universities to say it's a really nice idea, and actually we've set down the road of doing this.
Bruno, what is the key element you would want to highlight if you were only to speak two more sentences? What would you really point to?
It depends really on the technology that we have picked up for societal
Mm-hmm.
purposes. For instance, we have a milk cooling technology that we use to cool milk and to allow farmers to transport their milk in much secure circumstances. And then our
Mm-hmm.
key goal is to make sure that the salary or the revenues of the farmer increase, and that only that societal group benefits from the impact that we wish to create. It depends really on each technology. We want to create an impact every time on a different field that we need to define in advance. So there is no general answer to your question, but on a case-by-case answer.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to shift gears a bit because this is an ASTP audience and you have 1 minute to explain to them how they can get involved. So how can the audience be involved in both your projects? Lisa.
You can come along and engage in our training course kicking off next year, which we are designing to be directly applicable to continual professional development. So if you are interested in having an RTTP qualification, you can come on our training courses. If you've already got one or you aren't terribly interested in qualifications anyway, you can come on our training courses too. So we will kick off in January of next year. We'll have 8 physical events. We'll have a lot of masterclasses online. You can come along and learn how to use our toolbox, give us feedback, and help us to refine it.
Bruno.
For our membership, ASTP membership, we have 3 things to offer. We also have trainingships on impact licensing principles and data stewardship, a very important point, how to use the data that are collected from the technology. Secondly, is that we would want to invite and consider the ASTP membership to become a clearinghouse. Are they suitable? Is their organization suitable to do that? And the third point is maybe to participate to a survey that our consortium partner, the University of Cambridge, launched yesterday to see with stakeholders to what extent the EU Commission could consider incorporating more impact licensing principles in the valorization of the results that would come out of EU funded research. And actually, I will share now a link in the chat box where the members can actually, if you wish, the attendees can complete that survey. It's an important part of our mission, and it's one thing for which the ASTP membership can contribute to see what their views are on this topic.
So you're quite convincing in how and clear on how to get into your organization or the project. But why should we get involved? Why is it any relevant for TT officers?
Because it helps to find uses of the technology that otherwise might get lost. We hear from many academic institutions that they are sitting on certain intellectual property rights of which they're not always certain of how to fully exploit them. And there is always a commercial use, or there can be a commercial use, and we help them to find other uses that come on top of it, or sometimes a societal use can be a start for commercial use. That can also be the case. It can interact. It can interact. So that's why we...
Lisa, why should people get involved with you and your project?
Beyond the training?
Maybe to
I mean,
beyond the training, yes.
well, the project, of course, ends, unlike Bruno, where the Impact Licensing Initiative will continue and continue. Both our projects come to an end. So for me, getting involved with the project, learning how to use the toolbox, we have used special interest groups in the first 2 years. So I might have said, 6 months ago, come and join our special interest group and help test the tools as well. But we are now moving beyond that phase. I think it's really important that people get involved in order to learn how to use the tools so that they are able to adopt them, use them, adapt them, evolve them going forward for their own organization and for their own professional advantage.
I'm looking at the clock and I see we have 5 more minutes before the Q&A starts. So I'm going to invite both of you to present at least one really illustrative example to really understand what it's all about. And I'm going to turn to Bruno. Bruno, we've met before. I've seen various examples in action, and I would like you to brilliantly and convincingly, as I saw it then, to explain it to the audience now.
Thank you. Geertruida, I think the most compelling example for this audience, for the ASTP membership, is the example we have in Belgium, actually, from the Leuven University, where a very breakthrough technology was developed about producing hydrogen directly from panels that look like solar panels that during the day and even during the night are exposed by light, and in the evening and during the day it produces hydrogen on a permanent basis. And this, I'm not speaking about years, but about decades. I mean, this is really can go on for 15, 20 years. They produce hydrogen, they need minimum maintenance. And that technology was introduced in the spring of 2022 with the outbreak of the Ukraine war, when the gas prices rose. Can you imagine the commercial potential that this technology had? And a spin-off was created by the University of Leuven with the clear intention to make that hydrogen producing tools, that hydrogen producing machine, it looks like a solar panel, very, very profitable. But at the same time, the inventors and the founders of that university spin-off had a brilliant idea about the societal use of that same technology. And they set up a foundation at the same time that took a license from the commercial venture to exploit the low pressure applications, the collection of hydrogen at low pressure to serve societal needs in remote areas where, and mostly in areas where there is a lot of cooking on wood, which is very, very destructive for environment, and to help those societies to cook on hydrogen gas instead of burning with wood. Yeah. And that split of the two uses of technology is a wonderful example that already at the level of university, it was an early technology that is still under development, but the idea is there. We have the panels, we can license them out, and we can license them out for very profitable hydrogen collection and do whatever with it for commercial purposes. And there is a societal impact where the hydrogen is being collected for very specific purposes, and we developed new IP to collect and transport that hydrogen and to use it. We even have a patent on a hydrogen burner, which is a very specific technology. And that split is a nice example of how the technology can be split into two different purposes, and it is done at university level. It is not done by a venture who was already very, very profitable. It was from the outset that the founders of the venture and the inventors wanted to make that distinction. I think it's the best example I can give for the moment.
And it's for me, it's also very clear, quite clear that the vital role Impact Licensing Initiative played in bringing this all together.
Yes, we acted there as a broker. We played a bit of clearinghouse without formally intervening as actor. We inspired the inventors and the founders of the venture to make that distinction. Yeah.
So Lisa, your example or examples.
Well, what I want to do is come back to the Classical Plus toolbox, actually, knowing that we have an ASTP audience here, and everybody, I think, would acknowledge that trying to do licensing deals in the arts, humanities, and social sciences is tough. We get a lot of results. We get things like questionnaires. We get studies that come out where actually there would be a benefit if they reached more people, but they're very hard for somebody in a technology transfer office to invest time in, because you would have to do many slightly different licensing deals to do this, and people haven't got time. And in the end, the license is probably going to be non-royalty bearing. It's going to be free. So one of the things that we're putting together in our Classical Plus toolkit at the moment would be something that guides research teams to take a stronger role in being able to put their research results out, their questionnaires for things like eating behavior, canine behavior out. They would be able to approve a relatively simple license that somebody applied for, based on a series of questions and checklists. And they would be able to ask that people who licensed that actually came back and gave feedback, which feeds back into the research side of this. And we have seen some groups who are doing this. They're using either Creative Commons licenses or they use their own license slightly adapted. They will often use a licensing platform to do this. And one of our partners is eLucid, and they will offer licensing platforms. But I think if you can get the research team putting effort into managing the licenses going forward, then it's possible for the technology transfer officers to give a little bit of a steer and a little bit of a help, but they don't have to put in the same level of effort that they're trying to put in to license a patent, for example. And I think if you're out there working with the arts, humanities, and social sciences, something like this will be a powerful way to engage with your stakeholders within the university or the research institute. So that feels like a small collection of tools for us, but I actually think it could be quite a powerful one for tech transfer professionals.
I get that. I see that. So thank you. Thank both of you. And we're tip top on time. So we said a conversation of half an hour. So I now turn to there's some type of back office, the backstage, and the backstage there is a moderator who will have collected your questions. So I turn to her. Question 1. Could you give examples of IP that has been licensed for a societal purpose? I think that I would like to invite Bruno first, because it seems a self-evident question for him, but then
Yes.
Lisa, you will have an opportunity to join.
Yeah, indeed. I just gave an example 3 minutes ago about that technology on producing hydrogen from what looks like a solar panel, and actually it is a solar panel, except that there is no electricity that comes out of it, but hydrogen. Another example is from a commercial company, a publicly listed big warehouse company in Belgium, that uses a passive cooling technology to transport its goods, its meat, its vegetables throughout the entire Belgium and France to its individual warehouses. And those trucks cannot all have active refrigerators. So what they do, they centrally make coolers, and They have a technology that allows boxes to stay cool for a number of hours that is needed to transport the meat and the vegetables. We took an exclusive license on that
Mhm.
technology for the low and the middle income countries in order to make vaccine carriers, transportation, so boxes that use that same passive cooling technology for vaccine carriers. And we already improved the way to make those coolers. And a very important element in our impact licensing strategy is that all data about improvements are licensed back to the technology owner. So it is a very successful collaboration where on one hand, the technology is literally on the trucks and hundreds of trucks
Mhm.
in Belgium and France every day. And now in certain remote areas and low and middle income countries, you see these vaccine carriers emerging on passive cooling with the same passive cooling technology to transport medicines and vaccines. And for very important for that warehouse company, it was totally unimaginable before signing the
Mhm.
license that they would ever enter or get in touch with the medicine business. And now they are, thanks to impact licensing.
Mhm.
You see, they are now dealing with pharma companies, whereas before they never had any intention to do so.
Yeah. I think I recall that that was the very first case you shared with me, and I was wow, I was kind of flabbergasted. I was like, wow, see what's happening, and for good causes, technology adaptation, refurbishing, and then benefiting to a wider audience, to more vulnerable audiences. Thank you, Lisa.
Let me give you a very different example, which is one that we
Mm-hmm.
studied in the first year when we were going out and mapping all these different examples. This is called Kiva.
Mm-hmm.
Kiva, which I think comes from Finland, is an anti-bullying campaign. It's designed for schools. It's designed to prevent and minimize bullying that would be taking place in the classroom among young people. And this was the result of a very large amount of research, which the Finland government originally paid for, where they went out and they studied the situation. They studied how you can deal with the situation, how you can minimize the situation. And on the basis of that, they produced a course for schools. They also produced training and educational material. They put a trademark out on the Kiva name. They produced it in their own language, but with the option to license it. It had a huge impact that can be seen as it went out to schools across Finland. But there was also interest in other people in being able to license this because the basis of this was really strong research, which
Mm-hmm.
was published, peer reviewed. And their business model is that it is freely available nationally, but whenever it goes international, they charge for it. They charge for the materials, for use of their trademark, for their name. If they have it translated, they do the translations and then they own the copyright on the trademarked on the translated material. And by licensing this out to many countries now, they manage to make enough money to be able to offer it free to their own country and to continue, if you like, to top it up through further research. So it's a sustainable business model. The impact in terms of what it did across schools is proven. It was very, very obvious what it did to
Mm-hmm.
young people's interactions. Um, but I said to them, why would people adopt this? Why would they come to you? And they said, because of the quality of the research. If you're trying to
Mm-hmm.
reproduce this somewhere, you can't just come in and put together an anti-bullying campaign. The basis of this is high quality academic research, which is now being used across the world. So that for me was an absolutely wonderful
Mm.
example that combines so many things in terms of knowledge. They don't have any patents at all. They talked a little bit about copyright in terms of translation, but mainly it's the underlying strength of the
Mm-hmm.
research work combined with what is now a highly recognizable name and a really clever model to license this to different countries.
Thank you,
Kiva,
Lisa.
anti-bullying.
Yeah, that's a really eye-opening example. Thank you very
Yeah, it
much.
was.
So, backstage moderator, can you pull up the second question? Question from Fritz Fallot. How do you capture impact in the legal agreement? I think that relates to both of you. Bruno, you go first.
It is indeed the challenge to write impact licensing agreements where we write in KPIs and other measurement tools to see what is the impact that is being created. With capture, I understand measure, and there I gave the example of the farmer to whom we gave that milk cooling technology.
Mm-hmm.
To what extent is his milk of better quality? Can he increase the price of his milk? Those are measures, KPIs, that we also impose on our licensees to capture and to give us back in terms of data. I hope that is the intent of the question with the word capturing. And this
But
has
can
to
you
be set
also
up.
address the part relating to the legal agreement? How is
It's
that
in
being uh, phrased in the legal agreement?
it's the licensing agreement. I read that in the
I assume,
licensing.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's in the license. So these are all very, very specific clauses and language in the licensing agreement. It's not just an intent, it's just not a mere principle. It is set out in the annexes in great detail. It's the intentionality of
Mm.
one of our
And
three.
can you share a bit more about the terms or the provisions or the type of language in the legal agreement?
So we really say that if these KPIs are not met, the agreement can be terminated. So
Mm-hmm.
it's really an enforceable clause. And there are many clauses in the licensing agreement that can be just state mere intention, but there are no
Mm-hmm.
consequences attached to it. We call that the silver standard. Yeah, the silver standard. The medium standard is then that the agreement may be terminated if those KPIs are not met,
Uh-huh.
and then the gold standard is that really, if it's not met, you can have hardship clauses and termination clauses. There are levels in
Mm-hmm.
enforcing the impact licensing principles because not all IP owners are willing to concede that, of course.
Okay.
But we monitor that very strongly. It is not enough to have in the general preamble of the agreement very nice language that promises a lot of things, but then in the core of the body there is nothing. In the annexes and in the KPIs there is no commitment.
Okay,
But
that's very helpful.
yeah,
That's
that
very
commitment
helpful.
can have levels, and it's those levels that we are building up in our agreement
Okay,
table.
thank you very much. Lisa.
I'd answer this in two slightly different ways. If it's in terms of capturing impact through the licensing agreement,
Mm-hmm.
at one level, I mean, you can sort of look at the agreement, the licensing agreement that Bruno's been talking about. So if you're doing this for a vaccine or for a medical
Mm-hmm.
technology, one of the approaches now is to have what we call an affordable access plan, which has to cut in at the point where you have regulatory approval of the drugs. And within there, they're quite specific over, for example, how many doses you need to be delivering to countries that wouldn't be able to access it any other way, compared to how many doses you are delivering into Western Europe and the United States. So at that point, you can write the impact into the licensing agreement, and if it isn't met, you terminate. And if you come to the other end of the scale, where I talked about the social sciences and the humanities, where they're trying to produce their own low value, high volume licenses, this less goes into the licensing agreement itself, except where you are requesting feedback. So you would say, we know you're using this, and what we're now saying is you must report back to us at intervals over what this has happened. And you have the right again to terminate the licensing agreement if you don't get the feedback. So at that point, they're infringing. That's usually for the research team to be able to gather an impact. And for something like the UK, producing case studies that demonstrate impact from research are now a very important part of our research assessment exercise,
Mm-hmm.
which we put forward, and that's how the universities get assessed, scored, and funded. So I hope that does answer the question. I mean, you can clearly write into a licensing agreement that people
Mm-hmm.
must meet targets, and if they don't,
Mm-hmm.
the agreement is over.
Okay, that's clear as well. So backstage, are there any more questions? Yes, a question from Sylvia Godet from Amsterdam. Are the impact tool also applicable for shape, where most of the time no patterns are present? I think I'll invite Lisa first, because I think in what she has been explaining, patterns was not front and center, and that may be a bit different with Bruno, but Lisa, you go first.
Certainly for our Classical Plus toolbox, we are applicable to any discipline, and we are least focused on patenting because we think that that's where the licensing deals are easiest. So we're definitely there for people who are non-patent based. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Bruno.
We have also case examples where non-patented, not even design rights are applicable, but data or other intangibles, as long as it is something that is intangible and that has the potential of being licensed. That is a nice example we have of as a professor who I've collected measurements of footprints of indigenous people in Latin America and Africa, and those data are very valuable for shoe companies. And those are currently being licensed out to footwear companies who are willing to pay for it. And a part of the revenues goes back to the local communities where those measurements were taken.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't have to be patentable indeed, although I will not hide that patented technology is probably the most likely one that could be submitted to impact licensing. However, in many territories where we go, then those patents are not available. So you will have then, in any event, rely on other tools like know-how and then contractual arrangements to have some sort of an IP protection.
Thank you. So before we move on, I would like to inform the audience that we have like 12 minutes left. There's one more question in the queue. So please don't hesitate to step forward and ask your question to those two eminent speakers on impact. Let's go to the next question then. A question from Jacek Bludzinski from Luxembourg, a TT officer. Could you elaborate a bit more the initiative indicated also in Vilnius, which put impact licensing as additional requirement in EU funding schemes? What are the criteria and instruments to measure and document such impact requirements? Seems like a very practical but a very important question. Bruno, you go first.
If I may answer, so I just invited the attendees to fill in the questionnaire that is currently running. We are this week, as we speak, actually finalizing our recommendations on what could be done to promote impact licensing principles as and not as an additional requirement. That's too strong a language, probably. But how can we ensure that there is more attention paid to societal use of technology developed with EU tax money? Yeah. And there's two ways of doing that. Is giving incentives, for instance, extra grading, maybe. I'm not, this is just personal views. These are ideas that we are floating. We will see what the Commission will do with it. Can the grading of a submission be improved by making examples of making commitments for societal use? Another way of incentivizing is that by making sure that there is societal purposes imposed then in the use of the technology, of the results that are being generated with the research. Can we invite other institutions, funding organizations, philanthropic organizations to join the funding? That not only the EU, but also other organizations would join the funding. Is this another way of incentivizing the societal use of IP? Those are two paths that are being explored, and you will see questions to that extent phrased in the survey that you can answer.
Lisa?
The question here actually makes me want to go back and echo something that Bruno said earlier, in that I think it's really important that impact licensing doesn't become a buzzword, because an impact license, as defined by Bruno's project and initiative, is very specific. It must meet very specific criteria to be an impact license. Whereas what projects like mine are doing are trying to make licensing more impactful, which is different from that point of view. So when we did have this discussion in Vilnius, I think it's important that all Horizon Europe projects start to move towards demonstrating that they have more impact in general, whether it's through licensing or otherwise. Whether people should actually have to do an impact license as defined by Bruno's organization, I think is a slightly different question. We
Hmm.
need to be very careful that people don't just start talking about impact licensing because it's a new and exciting term. Somebody said to me recently, "We've done an impact license." And when I said, "Really?" They said, "Well, there's impact at the end of it." It- we need to be very clear what is
Uh-huh.
specific for what Bruno is doing. And I'm so pleased that they are bringing in standards and they will rate them in different ways, and you will have to meet different criteria
Hmm.
because an impact license and impactful licensing will be different things. And I hope Bruno would also nod about that one.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Lisa. I think this last intervention is really, really key. It's really vital in better understanding the distinction between the two organizations, but especially and even more with regard to the notion of impact and preventing that it becomes a catch-all word for who knows what. And that's definitely not the purpose, neither in ILI nor in Impact IP. Another element which often pops up in EU projects is sustainability. To what extent do your projects or organizations contribute to sustainability or safeguard what has been established for the future once the project is over, or in other areas, looking at Bruno, than just the project, because this is not a project? So I start with Lisa.
Within our project, it's really important because obviously we are just a project, and at the end of
Hmm.
36 months, we will all be moving on elsewhere. The main output of our project is the toolbox, and it's critical for us that it is sustainable. That's why we have tried to make our training course that's associated with it directly applicable to the RTTP qualification, because that way we can either deliver training ourselves if we really want to, but we can also work with national organizations, with ASTP, and with other organizations that deliver RTTP training, so that they will continue to deliver it well beyond the end of our project. And anybody who is therefore, if you like, given permission to go away and use the toolbox, we hope will be using it, adapting it, developing it, evolving it. It must live. I mean, it will not be the same in 3 years' time. We know that at the moment. So that's our sustainable business model for the output of our project.
So how long will the project last?
It's a total of 36 months, 3 years, and we're halfway through.
So the
That's
end date
typical
would,
for Horizon.
yeah,
The
so
end of
the, yeah,
end
yeah,
of
the
2026. End of 2026.
2026.
Yeah.
So people out there, it's now is the time to engage. Go ahead.
Yes. Please engage.
Bruno.
Yeah. Our sustainability is built in two ways. In our individual projects, technology projects, since we are very careful to see that they match with at least one SDG goal, the Sustainability Development Goals, as imposed by the United Nations, we try to ensure that there is sustainability reached at that level, at the technology level, at the results of the impact. As to ourselves, do we want to make ourselves sustainable? Yes, because one of the purposes of our mission, and our mission is only also 36 months, but we started a bit later than Lisa. We started
Hmm.
in August of last year, is actually to come to the creation of an impact licensing institute that would actually be the guardian of the principles that I tried very summarily to explain. And that
Hmm.
would also oversee the creation of impact of these clearinghouses, and that would oversee the compliance with impact licensing principles. So there we have a long-term goal where we hope that the sustainability of our principles is guaranteed.
Wow. I'm impressed, both by Lisa and the way you're going to take this forward, and Bruno by indeed thinking of how to challenge and create and safeguard the future of the value which is in both your initiatives. Backstage tells me that there's one comment, so let's go to that comment. Huh.
Absolutely.
Open source software is a way to bring societal impact. Okay,
Sure.
let's look at that as a statement. And I don't think it's controversial, but you may have some thoughts about it or some adds on.
Indeed, open sourcing. And we heard the other day, we had technology presented to us and we presented our principles. And the man said he had an IT background. I was like, actually, you're promoting open sourcing. And we said, yes, with the difference that for software development, the cost for repurposing are relatively low. Whereas for certain other technologies, you need a lot of investments and you need to attract investments and you need to set up a venture. That is the big difference, that for certain technologies, you cannot apply principles of open sourcing because it's too complicated and you need some exclusivity also as well. So there is a difference there.
And if I can add to that, during the COVID era, people were making ventilator technology available legally in a controlled manner. And when our toolbox does come out, what you will see is there are, in fact, two completely contrasting licenses for ventilator technology. One which came out through University College London, UCBL, and Mercedes, which is a really tightly controlled license in terms of it's free, but you need to qualify to be able to build technology like that because you mustn't kill people. And it was very time limited, so very, very stringent. And the other one that came out from an American university, which is what they called an open source ventilator license, which basically said, here's
Yeah.
everything. You can do what you like with it, but we are not going to be liable. And I look at these two
Mm,
models and I think utterly different. And I think there are pros and cons of both of them in terms
mhm.
of making an impact. So I wouldn't just say we should go open source. Given that the other license had no royalties attached to it at all, I would also say also consider whether there is a more controlled way of licensing that perhaps also ensures that the technology is being used safely. You don't want everybody building a ventilator, do
Last
you?
question. What are you going to do tomorrow? And I do not mean tomorrow factually, but I mean the upcoming months. What is going to be your focus? A new group you're going to target, a new technology you're going to target, a new license you're going to create, Bruno. And that will be that's the last question, and that's your time to provide the last answer.
I have, and I mean, my team, our consortium, has a very busy agenda here. Actually, end of this week, we have to set out, finish our recommendations to the EU Commission about how to integrate, not on a mandatory way, but incentivize impact licensing principles in the EU funding, next edition of the EU funding program. That is one. In July, we will work on the license agreement builder, on those famous clauses, as I explained. So we have a quite filled agenda. And every time our IDs are growing and growing, are getting more specific. That is very, very important. And from time to time, then we have a new technology project to study. And what makes us specific is that we build our principles out of cases, not the other way around. We do
But
not
then
start with.
how do you look for the cases?
We look for the cases by, and this is important, by reaching out to technology owners, by reaching out to members of ASTP and to say, do you have technologies that might be suitable? And this is going with conversations. This is not going by bringing large ads. This is by talking with people and
So
thinking
the
out of the,
coffee corners, lunches,
and the tea.
real conferences with real in person.
Yeah,
That's where you can do
by
the
taking tea,
exploration, and so tea in real life. Lisa,
absolutely.
Our near-term goals are to finish testing our tools. We have about 30 tools that we need to get tested and refined, and then to start winding our training courses around them to develop the training material and to plan our training courses, which is why I'm also interested in talking to people inside ASTP if they are organizing events next year where they would like us to run our training course alongside. We come with our own budget. So anybody out there who's saying we have a big event going on in Poland, Luxembourg, France, and would be interested in having Impact IP come along and launch their toolbox and run toolbox training, be good to hear from you too.
I see that we have 1 minute left, and the last question came in. So backstage, can you pull it up? It's a long question.
Wow,
Oh no, I have
No,
another
there's
question
a
on my
second one. There's
screen.
two.
yeah, that's a
So
long question.
can we put that aside? And the other one on engaging. There was a question on engaging. Yes, that's the one. Can you please pull it up? I'm not going to read it for time's sake. Where is it?
It's just been moved into the Q&A and out of the
Okay,
chat.
here it is. So I'm not going to read it aloud, and I immediately turn to Bruno and to answer, and then Lisa can think of her response.
Okay. If that hasn't been successfully licensed through commercial channels, what is the typical time frame? There is no what we usually do. The screening of our technology doesn't take more than a few months, and thinking this through and seeing whether we take the case or not is a matter of months. Of course, it is not helpful that there has not yet been a commercially licensed technology. We have to start from scratch. So finding financing will be more difficult, but in time frame we are talking about 1 year max to see whether we can do it. We are now operational for 5 years. We have about 10 to 15 technologies in our portfolio. So this is the rate at which we run for the moment.
Okay, then pull up the last question, and now we'll ask there was yes. Okay, so what will be the legal form of the clearinghouses? How will they be given administrative prerogatives? I think that's a question for Bruno. But Lisa, feel free to join after Bruno has responded.
This is very specific to ILL.
Yeah, Bruno.
Yeah, the clearinghouses, their legal form, the question that the self-assessment that TTOs need to make is to see, can they as a TTO themselves operate as a clearinghouse, or is it necessary for governance rules to set up a separate structure, which should then by definition be a non-profit structure? That's the only answer I can give. There are no clear guidance on what a clearinghouse should be in terms of legal form. It should be independent. That's it. And it should have not invested interest, of course, in the technology itself.
This ends our conversation and our Q&A. I thank both speakers, Bruno and Lisa. I hope our audience out there has learned something today, and I definitely hope that the concept and this idea of impact has been clarified, because we all want both initiatives to flourish and to find their audience. And I hope this web seminar has helped the audience to figure out which of both organizations, or maybe both organizations, can be really instrumental in bringing technology further to the market, be it for widely societal purposes or otherwise. Thank you very much. Also thank the backstagers, and I hope to see you again somewhere in the future, in person, with or without tea. Have a nice evening.
Thank you,
Bye.
Geertruid, for moderating
Thank
us.
you for your moderation.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.